Welcome to Fuse, the global podcast for the PRCA, where we explore the evolving landscape of global communications and we bring together leaders from public relations, politics, business and academia and media to spark new ideas and ignite innovation. Tom Mayne is a freelance researcher and writer. He graduated from the University of Oxford in 2001 in modern languages. His research focuses on anti-money laundering legislation, especially in regard to grand corruption and kleptocracy. He is also a former research fellow at the Universities of Exeter and Oxford and a former visiting fellow at the Royal Institute of International Affairs, Chatham House. For over a decade, he's worked as a senior campaigner for Global Witness, an anti-corruption NGO that works to end the exploitation of natural resources and was responsible for the investigations in Eurasia. Welcome, Tom.
Thanks, Farzana. Thanks. It's good to be here.
So Tom, it's, I'm really excited about this conversation because I'm sure people are listening and they're thinking, what's that got to do with the PR industry? And that is an area that I'm really looking forward to delving into with you. But before we do, please let us know a little bit about you. What's your typical day in your life?
Well, most days are not very interesting in some ways, in that I'm at a desk writing reports. I usually have 2 or 3 reports on the go at the same time, and I'm flipping between them. It's a lot of work. Some of these reports can be 50, 60 pages long, and so I'm just at a desk trying to get through it. But hopefully the output is what's interesting, not necessarily the doing.
And probably a little bit like us PR folk, you have to always consume news and current affairs, especially because your work is often very geopolitical in nature. How do you consume news and throughout the day, and any sort of tips on how you keep up with everything, because your work is so international as well?
I think in the morning I would just open the BBC News website, maybe the Guardian website, and open 6, 10, 15 tabs of pieces I want to read and just work my way through them. As my work has a focus on Central Asia, I'll be looking at regional websites, Radio Liberty, EurasiaNet, also to get the news from the regions. So I don't necessarily have a kind of a grand plan of what I do every single day. I'm on social media a bit, looking at what's being posted on there, because I think that's quite important. You have to kind of filter out a lot of it, but there is some good stuff on there. So I guess a mix of traditional and more modern forms.
And Tom, regarding the work that you do, it appears as very mission orientated. What would you say is your sort of overarching mission and purpose?
Well, I think the mission is really to inform people about the dangers and risks of grand corruption, of kleptocracy, and how we in the UK, we might think we're far away from corruption which happens overseas, but of course, as London is one of the biggest financial centres in the world, if not the biggest, we're very much at the heart of it, and how our actions can inadvertently or otherwise facilitate the corruption that we see overseas. And
why does it matter so much to you?
Well, I think money from kleptocracies can have a corrosive nature on our institutions, our political institutions, our charitable and educational institutions. It can have an effect even on the rule of law in the UK, not just in the countries where the corruption takes place. And as we've seen with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there may be national security issues as well.
Yeah. And so you studied modern languages at Oxford. What did you study? Which languages?
I studied Russian and Czech. So not very well. Russian's, I guess, spoken by quite a lot of people, but there's not many Czech speakers in the world.
And why did you decide those languages in particular?
I was fascinated by Russian culture. I like the fact that it was quite a challenge. You have to learn a different alphabet.
Mm-hmm.
and you had to really do two languages at Oxford, and my French wasn't very good, so I did Czech, which has some similarities to Russian, so I had a bit of an advantage there.
And was Oxford quite an intimidating atmosphere to study in, or did you feel?
Not necessarily intimidating. The college I was at was a very friendly college. Um, I would say it's quite high pressured. You have to produce an essay a week, sometimes two essays a week on writers you perhaps never heard of before, or certainly not read much of. So there was a lot of reading to get through. I like to think that that's kind of put me in good stead to what I do now, where you have to condense a lot of information and put it into something that is hopefully readable and accessible and makes sense.
Yeah. And then when you left, you moved to London looking for library jobs. What was it about libraries that really called you?
Well, I'd spent so much time in libraries. I'd grown accustomed to them and thought, as a first job, hopefully I could get a job in a library. But common tale of people who just moved to London. I didn't manage to get any of them. So that idea was was out the window.
And so, what sort of libraries do you rate? I mean, libraries can be very atmospheric. I mean, I love the London Library in St James's Square. Any particular tips on libraries that you love visiting and studying in?
Well, if you go back to Oxford, obviously the Bodleian is very atmospheric. There's a particular reading room there, the Duke Humphreys reading room, which is kind of straight out of Harry Potter. But in London, obviously, you've got the British Library, and that's where I do a lot of work. There's some great rooms there. The business room is where I go a lot because they have these great databases where I can do a lot of my research.
Fantastic. And so your first job then obviously wasn't in a library. And tell us how you ended up at Global Witness.
It was completely by accident, really. After failing to acquire a library job, I was just in a bar in Dalston where I was living, and Dalston 20 years ago was quite different from how it is now.
Now, very hipster.
Yes, back then it was a little bit more rough around the edges, and there weren't too many places to have a drink. And I think I was sharing a table in one particular place in Dalston, and got speaking to someone on that table, and they worked for Global Witness, and they learned I spoke Russian, and they were coincidentally doing a report which needed some Russian language support. So I went in, volunteered for a few weeks, and then applied for a job, and luckily got it. And so I've often thought, what would have happened if I hadn't gone to the to a bar that day? I might be in a very different place now.
Would you say career advice is go to the bar?
Go to the bar, yeah.
You never know what doors are going to open. And Global Witness, I mean, obviously they've shifted now their focus into climate change, but for a good solid sort of dozen years when you were there, it was very much at the intersection of natural resources, so oil and gas, minerals, human rights, and corruption. And they're all incredibly interlinked. Where a lot of countries that have natural resources, it does end up leading to corruption, which in turn ends up leading to the suppression of human rights. Were you focused in any particular countries, or was it just the region of Eastern Europe?
So you could be tasked with looking at anything really when you were at Global Witness, but my area of expertise was Central Asia, and obviously having the Russian language capacity helped there. So any investigations into corruption, kleptocracy in Central Asia or Eastern Europe, I was involved in. And as you say, I think Global Witness has evolved over the years. I was there kind of in its mid period, where it was just starting to look at the aspect of corruption and financial services, and Central Asia. Has a lot of countries which are struggling with the effects of corrupt leaders. So there was a lot to write about.
Do you think sometimes, in a way, it's a mixed blessing for a country to have natural resources to the extent that it can end up opening the door to corruption and therefore human rights. Because I mean, I know so many people from around the world who are from very resource-rich countries, and they often say, we are so rich in natural resources, but yet we are so poor.
Absolutely, there's even a phrase, the resource curse, which I think people tend not to want to use because it sounds like if you have natural resources, you are automatically cursed into falling foul of corruption. So sometimes you hear the phrase paradox of plenty. But it is true that some of the countries with the most plentiful natural resources are the most corrupt, and that's because the people who get in power often steal those resources, and then they have something to protect, so they have to clamp down on any political opposition, any reporting of their misdeeds in order to keep hold of what they've got.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit later on about Chatham House and the report that then highlights what happens when they then come to certain countries like the UK, and spend their money here and the repercussions it has to the UK. You then, after 12 years working there, obviously you realised that this was your key passion and mission, and you ended up then writing this incredible report, the Kleptocracy report, which made a huge sort of significant impact on me and many others who read it. How did you then leave Global Witness and come into the world of sort of the academic world in Chatham House?
I'd had a great time at Global Witness, but just wanted to explore other things. As you say, Global Witness was in a transitional period, and it was a good time to explore other opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
So I was freelancing for a bit, doing similar reports, but for other organizations. And then I transitioned into more of an academic role, which is where I met John Heathershaw, University of Exeter, who's another Central Asian expert. Yeah. And through this collaboration, we ended up with some other academics writing the report, as you mentioned, for Chatham House.
So the report was published in December 2021, and it's on kleptocracy. Could you explain what does kleptocracy mean?
Well, literally, it means rule by thieves, and as we've been talking about, those countries which do have natural resources, but it doesn't necessarily need to be oil, gas, and minerals. It could be construction contracts or telecoms contracts, anything up for grabs that makes money. Basically, the leaders of that country will take for themselves and their political allies, their family members, and basically monopolize the business sector and basically steal from the people. And as we've said, this often comes with human rights abuses, with repression of free speech, of peaceful assembly. So all of the things that we've been talking about are linked when it comes to looking at kleptocracy and natural resources.
And of course, when your report came out, it was a few months before the full-scale Ukraine invasion. Did that turn kleptocracy up a notch? Because all of a sudden, all eyes were on sanctions, oligarchs, money coming into the UK from hostile countries. Did that amplify the impact of your report? Because all of a sudden there was a sense of sort of political expediency that was required to push through the sanctions.
Absolutely, it did. I think for 20 years, the opinion of most people in the UK, especially those in the financial services, was they like to make money, we like to make money. What's the issue? But with the full scale invasion of Ukraine, we started to see how perhaps that was a little bit of a blinkered vision, and we were having an open door policy to people who might not have the UK's best interests at heart. And I'm talking about the oligarchs. And I think even though the UK had a bit of a slow start, I think what they did do in terms of sanctioning a lot of these individuals was very much needed, if perhaps a little bit late in the day.
I mean, you were all over the news, I remember, for quite a period. Was that driven, in your opinion, by the invasion of Ukraine, and therefore the emphasis upon money coming into the UK from those who are close to Putin's government.
Absolutely, absolutely, it was. There was a renewed focus on Russian capital flowing into the UK. I was taking film crews from Romania around London to look at various oligarchs' houses, and so for a time I was, doing dozens of interviews a week, and I think it really put the issue of kleptocracy on the agenda.
And in your opinion, I know sanctions is not an area of expertise, but do you feel that the government adopted the right approach?
I think so. We can debate about the pros and cons of sanctions, but what the UK government did do was look at those figures very close to Putin, and said, well, we don't think that you should be benefiting from the support of UK anymore, whether it be the financial services or PR services, and I think that was long overdue, an examination of those links between these individuals and certain parties in the UK.
And it also precipitated not one but two economic crime acts. So you had the initial, and then there's a second one that's winging its way through the houses. Again, do you feel that these acts have done enough to cover and protect the UK from dirty money?
I think they've certainly advanced the situation. Some of the things that have been introduced are there is now a register of the people who own property through offshore companies in the UK. That's new.
Yeah.
And with the second act, that's excuse me, I'll just take some water. Well, I'll start again. Excuse me. So I think the economic crime acts have advanced things, and the second one just recently received royal assent. Two things that they have done is putting on record those people who own property through offshore companies.
Mm-hmm.
Now a record of who owns various expensive mansions in the UK. And also they've given much more power to Companies House, the UK company registry. Once it comes into effect, people will have to provide identification in order to prove who they are before registering a company in the UK. Also, Companies House will now have powers to investigate and to shut down any company that doesn't provide identification or is seen to be abusing Companies House. For years, we've had this system where you've basically needed no identification to have a company in the UK. And as we know, UK companies have facilitated financial crime all over the world. So the acts are a great step in the right direction, but what's going to be important is enforcement of these new provisions. If you don't enforce the laws, if you don't enforce the regulations, you may well as not have passed the laws in the first place. So that's going to be key, the enforcement.
And also whether or not Companies House will be given the resources to actually enforce as well.
Absolutely, there's some debate about that. I think its powers are being significantly increased, but it seems to be such a messy situation at the moment. There's one particular Twitter feed that I look at occasionally, which just gives these crazy examples of dozens of companies being registered at fake addresses, just residential addresses. So there's a lot to tackle there. And as you say, we need proper resourcing of not just Companies House, but also the National Crime Agency if a crime is being committed, for the proper resources to be put places where there can be a proper investigation and anybody abusing the system can be shut down.
And you mentioned earlier that there are also repercussions, journalists, academics, think tanks that raise awareness of these issues. You're obviously opposing some incredibly powerful, wealthy people that have a lot of means at their disposal. And so think tanks like Chatham House and others are often on the receiving end of slaps. And I think in early conversations that we discussed lawfare, which is using sort of legal action as a means to to sort of wage war, as it were. Could you explain exactly what are slaps and their impact on freedom of speech and how it impacts academics, journalists, think tanks?
Sure. So a SLAP stands for Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation. And I think we all agree that we need libel laws. You just can't go around saying anything about anybody without there being repercussions if you are lying or you've not done your research and have said something that is not true. But in the case of slaps, we're talking about people who are basically intimidating people into public interest reporting, usually on financial crime, but it can be on a range of matters. We know certain celebrities have liked to use slaps as well to prevent public interest reporting as well. But in my area, it really is in regard to economic crimes. And the situation is the UK laws, the way that they are set up, the costs are just so huge. It's a one-sided battle. So if you can threaten somebody with a libel case, which even if it gets thrown out at an early stage is likely to cost several £100,000, the effect of that is that report may be quashed out of fear of these costs. So it's too one-sided in the favour of the rich, who, if you're a billionaire, a couple of £100,000, or if it goes to trial, a couple of £1 million isn't really going to count for much. But if you're a news outlet or a regional website or even a freelance reporter, you're not going to have that money to defend a case, and you may just retract your article, and that information never gets out there in the public domain. Information that is in the public interest.
And it probably also acts as a bit of a deterrent, because when that happens and you see a think tank or a fellow academic or journalist being sort of taken down and sort of moved to financial ruin, it sort of makes others sort of think twice, I imagine.
Absolutely. I think there is a strategy on behalf of certain people, certain companies, that, if we launch a slap, it's going to make people think twice before reporting on our activities. And so the effect is that information isn't out there, and the public perception of that person or that company is skewed because you're only getting half of the story.
So it's not so much an issue that the campaigners are worried that they're going to lose the legal case. It's more a question of not being able to finance the legal case. Are there any changes that's in the pipeline to prevent?
I think that there is a lot of work going on about bringing in some anti-slap legislation, and there is discussion about how it would look like. How do we protect that? Because obviously people do have a right to go to the courts if they feel that somebody has said something that is incorrect about that. But how do we balance those interests? At the moment, it's just too far skewed on the side of the ultra rich, and there is legislative efforts afoot to change that.
So I'm a big fan of Chatham House. So when I saw the report, I read it in one sitting, and it was fascinating. It's actually a former client of mine. He sent it to me and he said, I really think you ought to read this report. And I was absolutely shocked when I came across the PR industry chapter, because I read it thinking, I'm interested in geopolitics and so forth. And I didn't expect an entire chapter for the PR industry, because I've never really connected the dots. Why did you decide to focus on the PR industry? Of course, you focused on multiple areas. So you had the role of charities, you also had educational institutions like Oxbridge, political parties, funding, also the legal industry, but you did have also a chapter for the PR industry. What made you decide to include? Because on most sort of reports around corruption, I haven't seen so much of a focus on PR.
Mm.
So how did that come about?
Well, I think you're right. The front line in the fight against financial crime are the financial services, so the banks, the real estate agents, the accountants, and so it should be, because those are the ones who are actually dealing with the cash, and those are the industries that are regulated for money laundering purposes. But the PR world, who aren't regulated for money laundering purposes, can play a key role in, for example, bolstering a person's reputation, opening doors for them in charities or in politics, and really providing a kind of a laundering effect, not so much on the money, but on the reputation of a person, that can perhaps inadvertently have a negative effect on our institutions here in the UK.
And so after the report, you've been working on a dedicated report on the PR industry. And when is that due to be published?
It's going to be published very soon, hopefully. We're thinking at the end of January, the beginning of February 2024. And we're very much looking forward to getting it out there and continuing that debate about what's the issue here, and how do we make things better for everyone.
And the report will be published through another think tank.
It's going to be published by the Foreign Policy Centre. We're very glad to have their support, and we're looking forward to having it out there.
And did you dedicate a whole report to the PR industry because you felt actually this is an area that has often sort of hasn't really been scrutinized, and it actually was an area that you wanted to delve into a bit deeper?
I think so. I think as I say, the PR industry has perhaps been off the radar to a certain extent when it comes to kleptocracy, and I think in certain parts of the PR industry, there's perhaps not much awareness of the issues, and so I think the writing of the report is just to start that conversation. We've got these economic crime acts about how can we improve Companies House and the financial services, but what else can we do? What other industries can we look at who may be lending support to kleptocratic regimes?
So it's really, your approach is a sort of holistic, systemic approach to combating dirty money, and that's the public sector, the private sector, and public awareness, and that's where I imagine the PR industry came in. Now, there are, of course, sort of ethical guidelines that do exist already in our industry. We have various different industry bodies. Do you feel that they are fit for purpose?
I think the guidelines set out by the PRCA and the CIPR are strong, but of course, you don't have to be a member of either membership body to do PR work. I also think that there is perhaps a little bit more to do in terms of just general awareness of what the problems are. The guidelines are not very specific. They're by their nature, they refer just general principles of ethical behavior. But I think there are some things specific to dealing with kleptocracies that need to be discussed, and that's why we delve into them in the report.
So you're obviously very aware of the high-profile case of Bell Pottinger.
Well, absolutely, and that's a great example, Farzana, because they were not a small fish. They were a major PR firm, and their work in South Africa, which was shown to be racially divisive, shown to stir up various tensions that had been bubbling under the surface, really on behalf of a high net worth family that had strong links to the then rulers of South Africa. It was really shown to be beyond the pale, to be misleading, and to be not in the public interest. And as we know, it was really caused the downfall of Bell Pottinger. So, as well as various ethical concerns, there is a danger that if you choose the wrong client, you may go out of business if that wrongdoing is found and publicized.
And I must say, hats off to the PRCA, because they were indeed members of the PRCA. And also what triggered their demise, some would argue, was actually being kicked out of the PRCA so publicly that then led to a lot of their other clients dropping them, and then they were financially unsustainable. Now, if we look at what's rumbling in the news nowadays, we've got Isabel dos Santos, which is quite a fascinating case study that you've been exploring. And of course, people of that sort of profile, they often have reputation advisors that are helping them navigate the reputation building centres of the world, of which London is one of them. Because of our global media, we have an outsized sort of global voice. What's your thoughts on her case study?
It's a fascinating case, but it is really a prime example of when we're talking about the reputation laundering of figures from kleptocracies. Isabel dos Santos is the eldest daughter of the former president of Angola. She has a net worth of around about $3.5 billion, I believe, and through various PR agencies. She would be a very high-profile speaker at various universities, at Yale, at the LSE here in London. But since her father departed from the presidency, she is being investigated for a variety of reasons. She obviously says that she's committed no wrongdoing, but her assets have been frozen in both Angola and in Portugal. So the investigation is ongoing, and there is definitely, I think, questions to be asked about how has she managed to attain such a fortune. Yet the tale that the PR agencies told was that she was, a successful self-made woman. She was a strong figure who is should be seen as an example to everybody. But that's not really the full story. And as I say, there are many questions over how she actually came to acquire this wealth in the oil-rich country of Angola.
And playing devil's advocate, if her her previous PR agency, if they said, well, we didn't have any evidence, she wasn't convicted of anything, so what do we do? Act upon suspicion. And what about the principle of innocent until proven guilty? So what would you say to those PR agencies who did actually support her, or she may obviously have ongoing support from PR firms?
I think we just have to be a little bit more realistic about what happens in kleptocracies. In kleptocracies, there is no rule of law. The president's daughter is, as long as their relative is in power, is never going to be indicted, investigated, jailed. So they're never going to have a criminal conviction against their name as long as their relative maintains power. So it's not good enough just to say, well, this person has a clean criminal record. You really need to look at the country in question, look at what people have been saying about the country and about the person in question. It's absolutely fine to represent someone if they are accused of a crime. But when it becomes actually misleading, as it has in Dos Santos' case, we have an example we mentioned in the report of PR agencies being involved in spreading misleading information about her, the criminal investigation into her. Then I think it becomes a different thing. It becomes something which I think is not in the public interest and is misleading and potentially harmful.
So would you say that, in your opinion, PR agencies should be less naive about working for clients from such regimes, to realize that just the way things work in the UK is not, the same sort of rule of law and governance is not also in these other countries and regimes, so they shouldn't sort of compare and contrast how they would operate here compared to other countries. And also, if they do take them on as clients, to really make sure that whatever information that they're disseminating is the truth, and they're not looking to mislead and to enable kleptocracy.
Absolutely. I think you just need to do some research. This concept of politically exposed person, which is a concept from the financial services, it means basically somebody who holds a position of political power. But the legislation in the financial services also covers close relatives of a PEP, as we call them. So siblings, parents, children, because we know that financial crime, kleptocracy is often carried out, by the close relatives of a politician, that they're not doing the actual money moving themselves. They're getting close relatives to do it. So you need to be, I think, very careful if you are potentially representing somebody from a kleptocracy and they are related to somebody who holds political office. You have to ask many questions about how have they come to acquire that money, and what is their intention. They may come to you with something which might sound relatively innocuous. They might want to invest in the arts in the UK or in charities, but that will have a laundering effect of their reputation, which may open doors for them. And of course, they may then move on to other kinds of influencing via a PR agency or not, such as political donations, donations to universities, perhaps with an ulterior motive at heart.
So it's not just the straightforward media and relations and content. Is also facilitating the introduction to institutions in the UK in order to sort of get that what we call sort of brand adjacency, that credibility that comes from donating to one of the sort of top universities or charities. So you have touched on many potential solutions for PR practitioners, including to be much more aware in terms of the countries that the clients are coming from, whether they are kleptocracies, whether the client themselves is related to a PEP, a politically exposed person, and to really ensure that what information they are disseminating are also is really fact checked, and they're not unwittingly enabling mistruths. Now that I understand, but also other areas that you feel that PRs are enabling is through facilitating of donations, philanthropy, arts and culture, donations to political parties. So all of that also forms the vehicle for these people to be able to move through society. And it's not just for them to have a lovely time at drinks receptions, for donors. But in your experience, you've also seen that is a stepping stone to acquiring additional influence in areas that we should really be concerned in, such as our political institutions.
Yes, I mean, it may well be that all they want is a nice life in the UK, and the PR firm will just have to ask themselves, is this the kind of person I really want to be involved with? They may not have an ulterior motive, but they may well do, and we have seen various Russians or people who've acquired British citizenship who were originally from Russia. We've seen people close to Putin make those political donations in the UK where there might be an ulterior motive. So I think certain sections of the PR industry just have to be a little bit more aware of the risks. Talk to NGOs, talk to researchers, and make sure you're getting a full picture of not just the country but the person in question, to make sure you've got the full information about that person before you make a decision about representing them, because what they say to you might not be the full truth, and what they say they're going to do might seem quite harmless but may actually carry an ulterior motive.
And what about due diligence checks? So, PR firms, we don't have the sort of budgets like law firms or management consulting firms. Obviously some do, but there's a lot of boutique agencies. There's a lot of one-man bands in our industry. how could they practically improve their KYC, their know your customer due diligence checks, if they don't have the ability to hire lawyers and researchers and they're time poor and they don't have a lot of extra money to sort of throw around in due diligence. What can they do?
I would say just seek out an expert, somebody from academia, somebody from an NGO, to get the full lowdown on the person and the country in question. You don't need to be an expert yourself.
Yeah.
I mentioned the British Library at the beginning of this talk. You can go to the British Library, the business section. You can tap a person's name in and get all the media articles from the last 10 years. And you don't need to read every one, but is there a pattern emerging from the media reporting of this person? You can also use the company databases in the British Library to see what companies are they involved in.
Yeah.
And even though that might sound like a lot of work, you can actually get a lot done in just a few hours of research, looking at public interest reporting on the person and the country in question.
And if they have any suspicions, what do they do with those suspicions?
Well, we're talking about, if we're talking about the financial services, there is a requirement under law that if you have a suspicion that money is being laundered, you have to report it to the authorities, to the National Crime Agency. Because the PR industry isn't regulated, there's no legal liability. So people don't have to be worried, from a legal point of view at least, about reporting or not reporting suspicions. But it is true that anybody can report a suspicion of money laundering to the National Crime Agency. We go into that a little bit in the report about how you can do that. And I would encourage people, if you have a client who is from a jurisdiction that has a high level of corruption, and you have suspicions that they may have earned that money in questionable circumstances, and may have even been trying to enlist your help in moving that money into the UK, then there's no reason why you shouldn't report that to the National Crime Agency. There's a way to do that. And I'm sure the National Crime Agency, they get hundreds of thousands of these reports from banks. I think it would be quite interesting for them to receive different kind of intelligence from PR agencies to get a fuller picture of what's happening.
Absolutely. And regarding the sort of lobbying activity, we've got the sort of adoption of the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme. Could you explain to us a little bit about what that is? In your opinion, is it a positive step for the industry to engage with anti-corruption campaigners?
I think it is. Again, the devil's in the detail about how it will work in practice. But it's certainly true that the UK is quite far behind other countries, United States, Canada, for example, when it comes to reporting of lobbying activities in relation to UK Parliament. So the previous system was you only had to join sign up to the put your name on the lobbying register if you were an outside consultant to a firm. So if you were an in-house PR agent or from any other organization, if you were just a normal employee, you wouldn't have to put your name on this register. I think what the CIPR and other people propose is really that if you're doing lobbying activity of any kind, whether it's for an NGO or for a PR agency, you should have your name down on a register, and there should be a record of the meetings you have with politicians. I think that's quite reasonable, and that seems to be the direction we're headed.
And why do you think the UK is so far behind?
Well, it's the UK is ahead in certain things and behind in other things. So in terms of the transparency of our companies, we were one of the first countries to adopt a register of beneficial owners, of the real owners of companies. But there was a long way to go, as we discussed, on the actual verification of that information and making sure that the information is correct. It's just been a quirk, if you will, that the register has been set up in that way to involve outside consultants only. I imagine that it was probably set up that way because consulting may have been lobbying may have been done by predominantly by outside consultants years ago. But the situation's very much changed now, and it's just one of those things that hasn't really been looked at until the last 10 years. And luckily, it looks like that there is movement on that now, because there needs to be transparency about the people who politicians are meeting. I think that's something that everyone can agree with.
Yeah, and also, there's been such changes and shifts in the industry. We now have law firms coming into the industry and expanding their services into reputation. So I agree, it's a far cry to yesteryear when it was just agency people focusing on lobbying. Now, it's been absolutely fascinating hearing about your story and the fact that you have proactively engaged with our industry, and ultimately your call for practitioners is in our industry to think critically, to be aware of the risks, and also understand that the power that we possess as PRs, which is such a strange concept for us to get our head over, because for so many years, the only way to communicate was really through journalists. So they were the gatekeepers. And now, of course, we can communicate directly and facilitate directly to the public. And therefore, there's a lot more responsibility in our hands. And I wanted to thank you so much for taking that level of time to engage with our industry, because in the past we've always had hit pieces by various different media outlets that says, oh, well, this PR agency is dodgy or that PR agency is doing this. And I think you've engaged with our industry in such a constructive way that I think will lead to a positive ripple effect. Now, I wanted to just understand a little bit about who do you feel, past or present, is a campaigner or communicator, because they're both sides of the same coin. In your opinion, who do you admire? I mean, you're a fantastic campaigner yourself, and I've watched your work for a few years now. But who would you say inspires you?
Wow, it's a good question. I think anybody who writes and speaks well, anybody who can present an argument and really back it up. So, let's pick two names, like Christopher Hitchens and Noam Chomsky. Two people with very different political viewpoints. Obviously, Hitchens no longer alive, but even though I might not agree with all of what Hitchens and Chomsky say, maybe not. Maybe most I'll disagree with, but the fact that they can present an argument and speak so eloquently about a particular subject is something I've admired in both of them. It's just fascinating to listen to them, whatever the subject.
Yeah, I agree, because I think everyone to a certain extent can communicate, but it's about, can you communicate highly complex ideas in a simplistic way that everybody can grasp?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's always fascinating. Now, you've had the most incredible career. You've worked at the highest levels of academia, through think tanks, and your work has really made an impact. What advice would you give to your younger self?
I think I would say just make sure to take a lot of walks and to get out of your head a little bit. And it's a cliche, the seize the day, but I think it is so true how so many of us we just are not in the present. We're always thinking about the next thing, the next job, the next event, the next whatever it is. And sometimes you really do just have to sit back and take stock and enjoy what you have, and not be concerned too much about what's happening on the next day.
That's a lovely way to end our conversation. And again, a huge thank you. I have taken so much away, particularly the advice of having to go to the bar, because God knows what you can end up with. Just imagine you could still be working in libraries if you hadn't gone to the bar and had a drink and had a serendipitous encounter with someone. So I think that's the beauty of life. Now, I wanted to thank you, Tom, and I also wanted to thank those who are listening. You'll find this episode on the PRCA's YouTube channel and on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, alongside other episodes interviewed by myself and my co-host, Dan Gold. If you like what you hear, please do share so we can grow our community. If you have any feedback or any topics or any people you'd like us to cover, please do contact us and let us know. We publish interviews every 2 weeks, so stay tuned. We have incredible stories in the pipeline from incredible people.